The Dive, which is our weekly segment where we take a deep dive into a single topic. And guys, we're 3 for 3 with The Dive, where we don't even have to have a conversation about what the story is going to be, because the story,
we came back at the right time.
We really did. The story is,
or did gaming news return with us?
That's true.
Correlation does equal causation.
The biggest story of the week is obviously Todd Howard having a 1,000 point achievement that only he can unlock. Let's jump.
All right.
No, obviously we're going to be talking about Microsoft's acquisition of Bethesda Softworks through their acquisition of their parent company, Zenimax. And we're taking parts of the story from Addie Robertson over here on The Verge. $7.5 billion in cash. Cold hard cash. I like to think it was in briefcases.
An Xbox gamer score.
Yeah, 7.5 billion gamer score, baby.
Each briefcase only containing $1 million. So it's just a stack of briefcases full of stacks of money.
All right, so let's do the math real quick. If each briefcase only had $1 million, that would be 7,500 briefcases, right? Am I doing that math correctly?
You must be. Because I'm bad at math.
Wild. Stafidi says that's a money move. It really is. So they acquired Zenimax. Zenimax is the parent company of Bethesda Softworks. Within this acquisition, they also gain all of the IP that's held by those studios as well. So I'm going to name some of these. You probably aren't familiar with most of them. Doom, Fallout, The Elder Scrolls, and then their upcoming game Starfield as well. Some details around the deal, again, at $7.5 billion in cash that's going over. The acquisition includes the studios that make up Bethesda Softworks. So we're talking Arcane and Machine Games, id Software, Tango Gameworks. They did note that there are 2 games that are currently in the works that have exclusivity deals with the PlayStation 5 that they're going to maintain. That's Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo from Arcane and Tango Gameworks, respectively. So I'm just going to kind of open this up to you guys. When you woke up at whatever time you woke up and saw this story, what were your thoughts? Well, I guess I was the only one that woke up and saw this story because it broke at 6 that morning, but you guys were probably up at 9 o'clock.
This was crazy. The first thing I did was drop into our PvA Discord and be like, guys, this is huge. Have you seen this? Just, I don't know. We can get into there's just a ton of implications about this, but this is a huge deal. The Zenimax and all of those companies that you've listed underneath them, the games that they publish, these are huge games. For Microsoft to take on ownership of those IP, this, I don't know how much you want to get into the details on the ripples, but this is going to have a lot of ripples moving forward.
No, I definitely want to get. Well, let's get initial reactions first. Cody, what was your first thought when you saw the headline?
I was just gobsmacked. This is,
I like
maybe the biggest news story in this industry in a long time. Not only because of the price tag, but yeah, because of the implications. I mean, this is, when you think about, like, if you just want to think about the scope of it, like, think about what companies, or I guess used to have a presentation at E3. Microsoft and Bethesda are 2 of those. Microsoft basically just purchased another company that had its own dedicated press conference at E3 for a price tag that's more than Disney paid for Lucasfilm, which is absurd. So yeah, this is huge, and we'll talk about the implications of it, but they are pretty, not only for this specific deal, but for Microsoft's strategy and for Sony's strategy, perhaps in response. This is massive. And obviously this has been in the works for a long time. I know some rumors had kind of been circling about it, but the fact that they were able to just drop it, notably the day before pre-orders went live for Series X, is pretty huge.
Yeah, I think the first thing that caught my attention when this deal came through, Cody, you already mentioned this in like comparison to the acquisition of Lucasfilms and stuff, but the $7.5 billion,
yeah,
is staggering to me. Like, not only just the implications of how much power Microsoft has as like just a purchasing entity in this space, but also just to think about how far the gaming industry has evolved, that like you see $7.5 billion and nobody's reaction to this was like, oh my gosh, they overpaid for Bethesda. Why would they pay so much money for Bethesda? But like, you look at $7.5 billion in cash and think, oh yeah, that makes sense. You know, like, had this deal happened 8 years ago, 10 years ago, and we heard $7.5 billion, we'd be like, holy shit, no, you don't need to be paying $7.5 billion for any gaming company. And I guess this is maybe the biggest merger of companies since, what, Activision Blizzard? What other big ones?
To think of what other comparable deals their acquisitions have been made, and I couldn't think of them. I know Microsoft paid a pretty penny for Mojang and for Minecraft, but this dwarfs that completely. Historically, I think Activision, Blizzard, Square Enix, those are the big ones that come to mind.
Yeah.
But I don't think any of them approached the $7.5 billion.
No, what was Mojang, like 2.5 billion?
Yeah, I think around 2.
So yeah, well, let's jump into some of the implications of this, guys. Like, so I think the first obvious question that we get when we look at this is like, okay, well, what does this mean for future Bethesda titles like Starfield, like The Elder Scrolls 6, like whatever the next Fallout is going to be? Because the only confirmation that we have is that Microsoft is going to honor those 2 timed exclusive deals, which is funny that they put it like that. I don't think you have much of a choice but to honor contractually agreed upon things. Yeah. But that future games will come to non-Xbox platforms on a quote case by case basis, unquote. So I guess my question to you is, what do you think is going to happen with Bethesda IP moving forward in terms of exclusivity?
I saw a lot of online discussion where a lot of people don't feel like anything's going to change, and that's just really naive. Like, this was a huge acquisition. Microsoft has been lacking in console exclusives for a while, and I don't think all these games are going to stick to Xbox exclusive games. But I think that we're definitely going to see a lot of at least timed exclusivity. We're not going to see all these things releasing on all the consoles all at once moving forward. That's just unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a big play for Game Pass because all of those games, I mean, other than the ones that have timed exclusivity for PlayStation, will come to Game Pass day and date of the release. Which means even if they do release on PlayStation, like the $70 price tag for that game, if you own a PlayStation, versus that being bundled into Game Pass, is a huge incentive for Bethesda fans to enter the ecosystem if they're not already in it. But I do think the phrasing of that quote from Phil Spencer is interesting. Other consoles on a case by case basis. It does imply that there could be some crossover, some still ongoing crossover, but I think we will certainly see a little bit more restrictive, like, spread of Bethesda's property across gaming.
Yeah,
it's too big of a gem not to hold on to, I guess, is the way I'm thinking about it.
And it's not just the IP that's too big a gem. Like, I just don't feel like you pay $7.5 billion for something for nothing to change.
Yeah, that's the jewel in your crown.
Yeah, and so I think naive is a good word that you use there, Larry, but I just think it's a little wishful thinking to think that nothing is going to change. And the argument I kept seeing, and let me see if you guys agree with my thinking here. Like, I saw a lot of people that were saying stuff like, Xbox doesn't care about hardware sales. All they care about is software sales. And I'm like, that's not true. Like, yeah, they don't care about hardware sales, but I would say it's not because they care about software sales. They care about subscriptions. in number of subscriptions. Like, and if the goal is just, well, we want to be able to put in we want to be able to put Bethesda games into Game Pass to attract people to the Game Pass service, but not change anything else about the gaming landscape, then why would they not have just approached this the way that they approach deals with like EA or somebody? And it cost them way less than $7.5 billion. I think the play for Microsoft is going to be like, hey, for the first year of these games, Fallout, The Elder Scrolls, Starfield, all these games are going to be exclusive to Xbox Game Pass, not Xbox as a console, but anywhere where Game Pass is available. And obviously you can buy the game outright on your Xbox console, but it doesn't benefit it. I don't want to say that. There is a benefit for Microsoft selling games that they publish onto PlayStation hardware. I mean, you do get a cut of whatever those sales are, but I think the benefit is far outweighed by the benefit you receive from saying, hey, you want to come play all of these new Bethesda games? Come sign up for Xbox Game Pass and play it on your PC or any of these other platforms where Game Pass is available.
Yep.
Yeah, I just can't see. I have seen that argument too, Luke, and I agree largely with what you said. I just can't see them spending $7.5 billion and then maintaining the status quo.
Yeah,
that just makes zero sense to me. And I think anyone who's arguing that they're not interested in selling hardware, like, sure, you can, yeah, as you said, you can play Game Pass on PC, but the Xbox is still the portal through which you largely access their subscription service. So they do need people to be purchasing their hardware.
And hardware may not be the most important thing, but you can't say, I know they just announced 2 new variations of a new console, but they don't want to sell any of them. I don't track with that at all.
Yeah, the logic of that argument doesn't make a lot of sense. And look, I know that those things are like hyperbole to say that Xbox doesn't care about console. Like, I know nobody believes that. Most people don't believe that. Like, they obviously care about it, but it is a priority thing. And I think what Xbox cares most about is people playing within their ecosystem. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be on an Xbox Series X, but hey, if you can play these games on your Xbox One X or on Game Pass on PC, somewhere like that, like, that's what's important to them. And I don't think that it benefits them very much. The other thing that we're assuming here, and I think that this is something that that people tend to overlook, is like, we're assuming that the next console generation is going to play out the same way this console generation does in terms of sales, to be like, well, it would benefit Microsoft to have that giant Sony player base purchasing their games as well. Viewing it as like a 1-to-1 comparison of how the PS4 to Xbox One consoles have sold. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to be a negligible audience regardless, but what I'm saying is, like, the people who are the company who is ahead in any given generation is always more closed off to collaboration with the competitors. We saw this generation with PlayStation, and they're just total opposition to crossplay for a long time. They were hopping on the caboose of that train, right, as it was like leaving the station. They weren't excited to get on it.
And I don't know that they hopped on so much as a rope just snagged them on the way and they were dragged along behind the train.
Yeah, that's a good point too. So, like, what's to say that Xbox doesn't start to outsell consoles from the PS5 and start to play just as defensively in terms of how walled off they want their garden to be?
Yeah. What do you think this means for Sony? What do you think this move means for Sony overall?
I don't know. There's a part of me that's like, if you see this as Sony, you feel like you have to respond, and I don't know what that response is. Like, there's nothing Bethesda-like that's out there, you know?
Yeah.
And PlayStation and Sony as a brand does not have the purchasing power that Microsoft has either. So there's no way they can financially, monetarily, like acquisition wise respond to this. But then there's the other part of me that's like, by comparison, if this was the other way around, Sony is so heads down on their own strategy of these things that it's not that they don't care about it, right? But it's just like, well, we've mapped out our course. We know what our identity is. Our identity is in these really strong things that there's no question about their exclusivity. You're only going to be able to play the next Last of Us here. You're only going to be able to play the next Spider-Man here. You're only going to be able to play the next Horizon here, like, until some of those games inevitably come to PC. So I don't know if it changes anything for PlayStation, to be honest, because I also don't think that people are going out and buying PlayStation 4 to play Fallout 4, like, even when it just newly released. Like, Bethesda games aren't console sellers either.
Yeah, although it is in their new subscription service. Fallout 4 is included in that little Sony collection. Yeah.
Yeah. Notice it's not Fallout 76.
Yes, yeah, notably. Yeah, I think it's I mean, I can only imagine how long this deal was in the works, so it's not like anything that Sony would do in response. It's not like they can just quickly turn around and do it.
Yeah.
Deals like these take so long, and there's so many moving parts of them. I also think that you're right. Sony's head is, like, especially right now at where we are in terms of like the next gen console launch coming up, and them kind of probably starting to roll out more information about games coming up. It's their head is down in terms of like just determining their strategy and just making sure they communicate to people what their vision for PlayStation 5 is. I think that's probably more important for them now than anything else.
I have not checked the math on this, so take this with a grain of salt. But I saw a tweet today about how just speaking to Microsoft's purchasing power, that this acquisition was the equivalent of only 2 months of Microsoft's profits. Like, they just saved up for a couple months and acquired the Zenimax.
Yeah. Which is an interesting note, just as far as like the magnitude of Microsoft's purchasing power. Not saying that that's how acquisitions work, guys. All right. I can already read your comments. Look at these ignorant fools thinking that Microsoft just saved up for 2 months.
Everybody became a financial analyst when this announcement came out. I noticed on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, people pretending to be experts on things that they don't understand on Twitter.
I know. It happened so fast. Everybody got a PhD.
I'm surprised I didn't see breaking news stories about that being the first time in history that's ever happened. Jordan Gerblick over on Games Radar put out this article about how Bethesda is going to be running as a, quote, semi-independent, end quote, publisher. So Bethesda as a company is going to continue to... Bethesda as a publisher is going to continue to operate somewhat autonomously within their as publishers. But I'm going to tell you this right now. That word means nothing. Spencer notes that, quote, it's about the culture of those teams. They're not about becoming us, end quote. And that's par for the course for all the way that Spencer's talked about all of these acquisitions. Like, they're not acquiring these different studios so that they like take on Xbox's identity. They're being purchased because of the identity that they have. So what do you guys think it means for them to run semi-independently?
I think that is purely just speaking to the culture of the companies. We're not going to be micromanaging them, but like you said, it just doesn't mean a lot.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, Microsoft's still calling the shots on which console's getting another remake of Skyrim next.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, this just reads as kind of like executive marketing gobbledygook to reaffirm fans of what they can expect from Bethesda moving forward.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm going to be honest, maybe Bethesda could use a little micromanaging, but that probably wasn't part of their deal.
Stafidi says, does it mean games have to be finished to be released? Look, man. in the modern days of video games. It's not just Bethesda either. You know, like it's
Look
just
at Avengers.
It's just the way the games are anymore. You know, like when you can deliver patches, it's easy to
it's just a beta.
Just see things as works in progress. The thing I think I'm learning just from this discussion that we're having is just how much like all of this is implications and speculation as to what this means. Like, it's not in Xbox's benefit to corner themselves into anything by making any promises about where and when specific games are going to be available to certain people, because the landscape of gaming is going to look so different 12 months from now than it does now, and most of the biggest IP that Bethesda has in the works is still years off. Like, we're not close to Starfield, we're not close to Elder Scrolls 6 coming out. Like, so why would Phil Spencer or anybody at Microsoft come out and be like, oh well, we're committing to bringing these, allowing all different platforms to have this, when they don't know what the world's going to look like in a year? Hell, we may not even be here.
Yeah.
You know. So, any closing thoughts on any of that?
I did want to briefly talk about kind of what we think, our opinions of what this means for the industry as a whole, because I think the conversation around acquisitions, and especially the speed with which Microsoft has acquired the amount of studios it's acquired, is certainly worth talking about. I know the conversation around IP and kind of creators being kind of helmed under the control of about like 4 companies in the film industry has been an ongoing conversation, especially with everything that Disney has been doing. The concept of monopolies and whether or not it's creatively beneficial for the industry at large, I think is certainly also something worth talking about in this case as well. Obviously Microsoft has been pretty open, like you said, about kind of letting the studios do what they will, but I think there is something to be said about like of the many studios that have control over their creations, many of those more and more increasingly falling under the banner of basically two companies. And so I was just kind of curious about what your thoughts on that are. It might not be a one-to-one with the film example, but I think it's certainly something that's still worth talking about.
I think the film example is actually a really important one, because what has, and I think we've talked about this before, because this matters to me. The film industry has gotten to where it is big blockbusters and small indies and nothing. There is no mid-tier release anymore, for the most part, and a lot of people want to complain about the companies doing this, Disney acquiring everything, Disney blowing everything bigger and bigger and bigger. But Disney is doing this in response to the pressure of the consumer. They only make big blockbuster movies because that's all that makes money anymore. And I feel like gaming has kind of gone the same way. And it's tied to the pricing of games, I think. We've gotten to where we have some big thoughts about what makes a game worth $60, and a mid-tier game does not cut it for the average consumer. We want massive gaming experiences. And so I think this is a bubble that pops eventually, and that there will be fallout from it one day, and not necessarily Fallout 5 or 6 or whatever we're up to.
Jesus.
I'm sorry. I'm a father.
I'd kick you out of this call if it wouldn't break our overlays.
But in all seriousness, I think that this has big problems down the road. I think that eventually we're going to see it in the film industry first. There are going to be enough big losses that this sort of bursts. But for now, I think we're just going to keep seeing this problem. I don't even know if it's a problem. We're going to see this behavior increase and swell and grow. And if you don't like it, then maybe start being comfortable paying $60 for a game that's not 40 hours long.
See, this is the kind of thing I love, because I agree with you guys from an ideological standpoint. Like, I think it's a bad thing if 2 companies are just like hoarding up everything in the gaming space. But I disagree with you guys' like perception of where the industry is in terms of where IP exists and where like fan engagement is, because I think that right now there's a pretty healthy ground in the middle of these spaces between total indie games and AAA experiences. Like, I work for a company that is an indie publisher who finds experiences that have more creative headroom to like take the step to the next level and helps to finance those games to get to that level. And we're not alone in our space. You know, you've got Devolver who's doing similar things. You've got Team 17 who's doing similar, like there's plenty of other publishers like us that exist that are trying to identify those people who need additional resources to get their vision to the finish line. And I mean, what's been the most talked about game this year is Fall Guys. Like, Fall Guys dominated the conversation for a solid month of time after its release, and Fall Guys is by no means a AAA game. It's by no means.
I do think Fall Guys is the exception to the rule, though. Fall Guys Among Us also falls into this category too, even though that was made a
2
year
years
ago.
ago.
But yeah.
Well, I'm pointing that out as the outlier just to demonstrate that like there are plenty of companies that exist on the belief that there's room to be made up here. Like there's sales to be made in this space. Like, you wouldn't have as many indie publishers like Modus or Devolver like if there wasn't viability in that market. And these aren't just like guys who are kind of like treading water out in the middle of the ocean. Like, these are companies that are thriving and able to identify that talent. But I also think these kinds of acquisitions also highlight the volatility of the industry, that like even a company like Bethesda sees an additional like sense of comfort in being able to be acquired by this. Like, whereas like you said, Cody, Bethesda is a pillar in the industry. They have their own E3 presence, like they have their own press conference. But for them to be able to look at this deal, and it's not just $7.5 billion of cold hard cash, but also the stability of being able to work under the umbrella of Microsoft. But I think that's also something that makes this industry unique from like the film industry is, and I'm not as connected in the film industry, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see a lot of like indie studios or like art house things that are like pulled in and acquired by the big boys to like Disney's going out and they're buying like Marvel movies and Star Wars, and like they're not going and buying indie properties.
Well, indie acquisition does happen. It's not Disney doing it. It's Netflix, it's Neon via Hulu. Companies are doing it and have found a niche there. That's why I said I don't think the comparison is 1-to-1, largely because I think the distribution channels for the film industry are still very limited. And I think the ability for developers to kind of find an avenue on their own is still out there. And so I don't think the fear that I'm expressing is not something that I think is like right around the corner. I don't know how many like billion-dollar acquisitions Microsoft is going to be making in the next few years, or how many like major deals Sony or Nintendo is going to be making. But I don't think like the divide between indie and AAA is as stark as it is in the film industry. Like you said, they're Ninja Theory is a AA developer, and there are other developers who either are AA or somewhere between indie and AA.
Well, Ninja Theory.
Yeah,
acquired by Microsoft.
Acquired by Microsoft. But I think there is it's an interesting conversation. Like, do they have I think there's an incentive for them to do something like this. As you said, there's job security in it, which is largely not the case in the industry. And it appears, at least from the outside looking in, that there is still a certain amount of creative control they retain. So is it all that bad to join up with a Microsoft? Is it all that bad for Microsoft to own all these properties if they still have the creative control that Microsoft claims they have?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a lot, I'm pointing out a lot of questions mostly because I'm still undecided about this.
Well, I mean, there's still like the universal truth that absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes,
like
I believe that to be the case.
And the more and more these studios are going to get acquired, the more we're going to start to hear stories of like creative stifling. But as long as you've got guys like I don't know Phil Spencer personally, even though he is a friend of the show. But he does seem to genuinely care about the creative integrity of the products that he puts out and the people that work under him. And like, I know that him getting it to an extent is a marketing ploy and like a front that's put on, but I think that who we see Phil Spencer present is at least how he's running his company. Like, not making any assumptions about the man himself, but I think that they get what players want and are and know that what players don't want is Bethesda to get acquired, so that Microsoft just milks them for all it's worth. Like, Bethesda's kind of done that to themselves already with some of their IP. So, I don't have that fear, but I get your point, Cody. Like, the more and more we see this, and the more that divide grows, I think the more worried I'll become. But for now, I see this, and this is a big fish swallowing a big fish, and so this isn't. Yeah. I'm more concerned when I see guys like Ninja Theory get scooped up, and it's like, well, these are guys who are doing really cool things. Like, Ninja Theory doesn't just have Hellblade; they were working on some cool stuff with like mental illness and some other like more experimental projects that I'm like, I don't want that sort of stuff to go by the wayside, which I don't think it is, but I'm more concerned about that kind of stuff. Like, okay, we've got more headroom to make Elder Scrolls, which was already going to be massive. Like, what's it really change?
Yeah, and with Bethesda, it's interesting because now Microsoft does have an interesting, like, diverse portfolio of studios under its banner. Like, Bethesda is one of the biggest AAA studios out there, but they also have little indies. Then they have, like, as we were saying, kind of like in between, kind of Ninja Theory. And so they do have a very diverse portfolio of studios under their banner, which is not something I really can say for Sony. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Sony knows what it's doing with its studios. They also have smaller indie studios under their banner, but they're most known for kind of their prestige projects, and that's fine. That's what they do really well. And to have that along with everything else is great. And that diversity among like priorities for studios is an important thing, so that it doesn't become what we're all talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead, Larry. You look like you're about to say something.
I was just going to say, Big Boy Roy said, I read an article today that Fall Guys is the largest PC game launched since Overwatch. Made $185 million in its first month.
That's nuts.
Yeah, wild.
Nuts.
And yes, it is an outlier in that sense, but it shows that there's like still viability in that. Like, what was the movie that won Best Film this year? Was it Parasite?
Parasite.
Mm-hmm.
But like, okay, that was critically acclaimed, but like, how much did it pull in the box office?
It actually made a decent amount. I mean, it was acquired by Neon, which is associated with Hulu, so they gave them a decent chunk of change too.
Yeah. So, but it wasn't like the largest.
Oh no!
It wasn't the largest
like
film in the last 5 years.
Event.
Yeah. So it like. And I don't think we'll ever see, like, you're never going to see some indie film that's like the biggest grossing movie in the last 5 years. There's still space for that in gaming. And that's partly due to the way that games are monetized. But the other thing you mentioned, Cody, that I want to hit on before we move on completely, talking about how this affects Sony, you mentioned the word diversity, which is of the IP that's being acquired here. Yeah. And this goes beyond just the Bethesda acquisition into all of the acquisitions that Microsoft has made over the last couple of years. But the diversity of the portfolio that now is owned by Microsoft is wild. And one of the criticisms that's been levied against PlayStation and their quality exclusives is they all feel kind of samey. They're all like third person action linear games, dads. Like, and so and there's power in the the diversity of that portfolio that Microsoft has that I think could be leveraged in really clever marketing ways, and just in connecting with audiences that aren't interested in third-person over-the-shoulder action-adventure games.
Mm-hmm.
You know? All right. Well, let's move on.